So Sherry and I are here holding down the fort for this portion of our ongoing series on meditations of the tarot. This time we're going to be discussing letter 6, the lover. And Michael was unable to join us today because he had another commitment, and Jed was unable to make it. So it's just Sherry and I today, but we're gonna do what we can do. And I think this time we agreed that we kind of wanted to start with, I think that the description of the card is important for this one, and in particular how it relates to some of the scripture that Tomberg chooses to open the chapter with. So do you want to go ahead and read the, if you read the scripture, I can read the introductory paragraph.
Yeah, okay. I'm just going to show the picture.
Oh yes, thank you.
There we go. It's not colored in, unfortunately, because there's some colors involved here. Okay, the scriptures are, she seizes him and kisses him, and with impudent face she says to him, I had to offer sacrifices, and today I have paid my vows. So now I have come out to meet you, to seek you eagerly, and I have found you. Proverbs 7:13-15. I, wisdom, dwell in prudence, and I possess knowledge and discretion. I love those who love me, and those who seek me find me. Proverbs 8:12-17. Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a ring upon your arm, for love is strong as death. Its flashes are flashes of fire, a flame of the eternal. Song of Songs 8:6-7.
Right. So with that in mind, then he jumps into the introduction of this letter. Dear unknown friend, here the whole composition of the 6th card is translated from the visual language of the tarot into the poetry of Solomon. For there, a dark-haired woman with an impudent face, clad in a red robe, seizes the shoulder of a young man, whilst another with fair hair and dressed in a blue mantle makes appeal to his heart with the chaste gesture of her left hand. At the same time, above, a winged infant archer, standing out against a white sphere emitting red, yellow, and blue flames, is about to let fly an arrow directed at the other shoulder of the young man. Does one not hear, in contemplating the 6th card of the tarot, a voice which says, I have found you, and another which says, those who seek me find me? Does one not recognize the voice of sensuality and the voice of the heart, and likewise the flashes of fire from above, of which King Solomon speaks? The central theme of the sixth arcanum is therefore that the practice of the vow of chastity, just as the 5th arcanum had poverty as its theme, and the 4th obedience. The 6th arcanum is at the same time the summary of the 2 preceding arcana, chastity being the fruit of obedience and poverty. So
I have one little question.
Go for it. Yeah.
She has a chaste gesture of her left hand. So I'm very, the left and the right hand are very salient to me.
Mm-hmm.
And when you read that last part there, where was it? Chastity, being the fruit of obedience and poverty. Now I know that the left and the right hand are interchangeable. Sometimes they're not always doing the same things in symbolism, right?
Right.
But anyway, I found that I just wanted to point that out, that the chaste gesture is with her left hand.
Right.
So I just wanted to say that because I think it's worth noting.
Well, I think it's actually, so here's how it's working in this. It has to do, most people are right hand dominant, right? And the hand with which a right hand dominant person takes to grab and seize things is the right hand. Right. So she's not taking the grab and seize. So she reaches out with her left hand.
Well, I like to think about it in terms of the sheep and the goats, right? Because there's a left and right hand in that story, right? Or in that symbolism. And I think
But in this case, it's actually
but actually I think
because what it's playing on is that she's not taking or seizing. It's
right.
that normal. It's playing on. It's inverting what you would normally what you would think in the symbolism of the right hand. Usually, the left hand is associated with the diabolical,
Not
right?
always though, because
Right,
like,
right.
so there's
Not always. I'm saying, and there's a specifically because it's related to taking and to not taking and grabbing.
right, which
Then
is
it
what I'm
becomes
thinking about when it comes to the
right.
sheep and goats. Okay, so there is a chastity about that movement of putting the goat on the left hand, right? It's not as taking and seizing, if you know what I'm saying,
Gotcha.
right? It's it's letting something be.
Right.
If you think about it in
Gotcha.
the
Gotcha. And I understand what you're saying now.
okay, so you have this right hand of the sheep. Now the sheep are not taken and seized either because sheep follow. Okay,
Right.
so they are on the right hand, and on the left hand are the goats, which are not being. And I'm not saying that I have this right. I'm just thinking about it. Which are not also not being seized and taken, right? But that are let to be.
Right.
So I think there's
No,
something
that
there.
makes sense because God leaves us to our own devices.
Well, that's a
Right.
chaste move, right?
Right.
That's not, there's no hubris
So
in that, if you know what I'm saying. You know, yeah, okay. I got us off track. Sorry.
no, it's okay. No, it's okay. I'll have to spend some time thinking about that one.
I'm always thinking about it. Whenever I see the symbolism, I'm always thinking about
Yeah.
the left and the right hand, because it's very prominent in some doctrines.
Right. And I
Yeah.
do, let's see. Okay. So he starts off talking about chastity.
Mhm.
And then let's go he a little bit further down here, he starts talking about what chastity means. And
Yeah.
he says one is chaste only when one loves with the totality of one's being.
Yeah.
Chastity is not wholeness of being in indifference, but rather in the love which is strong as death and whose flashes are flashes of fire and flame of the eternal.
Yeah.
It is living unity. It is three, spirit, soul, and body, which are one, and the other three, spirit, soul, and body, which are one, and three make six, and six is two, and two is one.
So why does he have two of the same? Three, spirit, soul, and body? Oh, because it's two
Because
people.
it's two people.
Two people. Okay, sorry.
Correct.
I know why I just got it now.
And then he adds, this is the formula of chastity and love. It is the formula Adam Eve, and it's hyphenated. It's not Adam and Eve, it's Adam Eve.
Yeah.
And it is this which is the principle of chastity, the living memory of paradise. And then he goes on a little bit further than that. He talks about, well, how does this apply to celibates? And he says, and the celibacy of monks and nuns, how does the formula of chastity, Adam Eve, apply here? Love is as strong as death, i.e., death does not destroy it. Death can neither let one forget nor let one cease to hope. Those of us, we human souls of today, who can bear within ourselves the flame of the memory of Eden, cannot forget it, nor can we cease to hope for it. And if human souls come into the world with the imprint of this memory, and also the impression of knowing that meeting with the other will not take place for them in this life here below, they will then live this life as if widowed, insofar as they remember, and as if engaged insofar as they hope.
Right.
Now, all true monks are widowers and fiancés, and all true nuns are widows and fiancés, in the depths of their hearts. The true celibate bears witness to the eternity of love, just as the miracle of true marriage bears witness to its reality.
Right. Yeah. Cue my conversation with this friend.
Cue what?
The conversation I had with this friend about.
Okay. Oh,
you know,
right. Yeah. That you were talking about before we started recording. Yes, absolutely.
Right. Which,
Right.
you know, when I read this morning, I thought I have to share this with her, because she was considering marriage or monasticism and wondering which one she should choose. And I told her basically that they were both the same.
Right.
And because, well, the way that I framed it was that either way, you have to put someone else ahead of you. You have to put someone else before you, which means you have to decrease and they have to increase, or you have to die, right? You have to lay down your life so that they might live. And so if you look at it from that point of view, monasticism and marriage are the same thing.
Or there's a point later when he says that he says essentially that love is being, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to being alone.
Yeah.
And I think this shows that like what the monastic life is for those who are living the true monastic life, it's not an escape.
No.
It's actually a loving embrace of the fullness of being when it's practiced correctly. And marriage is the same thing.
Yeah. Well, it is definitely a form of monasticism. There's a lot of things you have to deny yourself as well as a married person, right? You can't just go and do whatever you want. So, yeah.
Yeah, and he goes on later on. I think that's a good point to talk about. Do you want to talk about where he talks about love of neighbor? Because that's what this is. This is what this Adam Eve. This is kind of like what this is pointing toward. It's the prototype of love of neighbor. Hold on a second.
I'm going to read this.
Go for it. Go for it.
Quote really quick, because I think it has a lot to do with this too, especially in light of the monastic aspect. He says, the loveliness of the virgin, of being that, quote, has not yet accomplished anything, unquote, is motherhood foreboding and preparing itself, uneasy and yearning. And the mother's beauty is serving motherhood. And in the old woman, there is a great memory. And in the man too, there is motherhood. It seems to me physical and spiritual. His begetting is also a kind of birth giving. And it is birth giving when he creates out of his innermost fullness. And perhaps the sexes are more akin than we suppose. And the great renewal of the world will perhaps consist in this, that man and maiden, freed from all false feelings and perversions, will seek each other not as opposites, but as brother and sister, as neighbors, and will unite as human beings to bear in common, simply, seriously, and patiently, the heavy sex that has been laid upon them.
That's very good. And that ties directly into what he goes on to say about the neighbor, which is essentially what he's saying here is that this primordial like Adam Eve love is, oh, here we go. So, it's right here. And I'll just read it.
Yeah.
This is the origin of love, and it is common both to love which unites man and woman, and to love of one's neighbor. In the beginning, there was only one love, and its source was one, since its principle was one. All forms of love, charity, friendship, paternal love, maternal love, filial love, brotherly love, derive from the same unique primordial root of the fact of the couple, Adam Eve. It is for it is then that love, the reality of the other, issued forth, and could subsequently branch out and diversify. It is the warmth of love of the first couple, and it does not matter if there was only one couple, if there were thousands of them. It is a question of the fact of the first qualitative issuing forth of love, and not the number of simultaneous successive cases of issuing forth, which is reflected in the love of parents for their children, reflected in turn in the love of children for their parents, reflected again in the love of children amongst themselves, reflected lastly in the love of all for all kinship of human beings, and beyond immediate kinship by analogy for all that lives and breathes. Love, once born as substance and intensity, tends to spread, ramify, and diversify according to the forms of human relationship into which it enters. It is a cascading current which tends to fill and inundate all. This is why, when there is true love between parents, the children love their parents by analogy and love each other. They love by analogy as their brothers and sisters, by psychological adoption, their friends in school and in the neighborhood. They love, always by analogy, their teachers, tutors, priests, etc., through reflection of the love that they have for their parents. And later, they love their husbands and wives as their parents once loved one another.
Yeah.
So from there, he goes on to talk about how, like, our culturally we've gone away from this this idea, this understanding of chastity. And he talks about Freud's reducing of sexual desire or libido to the basis of all human psychological activity. And he says of that, Adam Eve is to sexual desire as white light containing the 7 colors is to the color red. Adam Eve love includes the whole range of undifferentiated colors, whilst Freud's libido is only a single color isolated and separated from the whole.
Yeah, which is what, yeah.
It is the very, and I'm skipping a little bit here, but he says of that, it is the very principle of unchastity, for unchastity is nothing other than the autonomy of carnal desire, so that the wholeness of the human being in spirit, soul, and body is ruined. So, and he compares that to like the love of Adam Eve in paradise before the fall.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, what stands out for me here is the fact that we always choose an aspect of something, mostly when we talk about things. So, and he makes the same observation in that he goes after Freud's pansexual doctrine. Then he goes after Marx's, that it's all about the economy, right? So he uses the term homo economus, economic man, or homosexualis, sexual man, at the basis of the Homo sapien. And then he goes on to Alfred Adler, who had this doctrine of what was it? I can't remember.
Will to power.
Will to power. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what he's saying about the colors there is that those things are all present in the Homo sapien, but they choose one of them because why? Because they can see it, right? Like it's there, it exists, right?
And then he goes on from there to say some very nice things about Jung, and he sees Jung as doing something very different. And I think a lot of our audience are interested in the work of Jordan Peterson, and I think this particular passage on Jung is very salient to understanding like why people found Peterson so resonant. So I'm just going to go ahead and read that. Or do you want to read it, Shari?
Sure.
It starts on page 128.
Yeah.
However, Carl Gustav Jung is the beginning of the paragraph. It is the 4th paragraph down.
I got it here. Now, Carl Gustav Jung reestablished the principle of chastity in the domain of psychology. The other psychological schools mentioned being contrary to chastity, since they break down the unity of the spiritual, psychic, and physical elements of the human being, which is what I just said.
Right.
Break it down into categories, right? He discovered the divine breath at the core of the human being. At the same time, the work of Jung constitutes the inauguration of a new method in the domain of psychology. It is the method of exploration of psychic layers in succession, corresponding to the layers of archaeology, paleontology, and geology. And just as archaeology, paleontology, and geology regard the layers with which they have to do as archives of the past, as time becomes space, which seems like a very anthroposophic thing to say, actually, right there. So does the depth psychology of the school of Jung treat psychic layers as the living past of the soul, which is as distant as the layer in question is deep. The measure of depth here is at the same time that of the history of the soul's past, going back beyond the threshold of birth. One can well discuss whether the layers are collective or individual, whether their continuance is due to heredity or reincarnation, but one can no longer deny the reality of these layers or their value as a key to the psychic history of man and mankind. More than that, one can no longer deny the fact that in the psychic domain, nothing dies, and that the whole past lives present in the diverse layers of the depths of consciousness. The quote, unconscious or subconsciousness of the soul. Paleontological and geological layers contain only the imprints and fossils of the now dead past. Psychic layers, in contrast, constitute a living witness to the actual past. They are the past which continue to live. They are memory, not intellectual, but psychically substantial, of the actual past. For this reason, nothing perishes and nothing is lost in the domain of the psyche. Essential history, i.e., real joy and suffering, real religions and revelations of the past, continue to live in us, and it is in we ourselves that the key to the essential history of mankind is to be found. Which is this great cloud of witnesses, right? That the Bible talks about.
Right.
And
go
why?
ahead go ahead and read that next section too. Particularly, and I would like to point out like that one of the things that Jordan did that resonated with people the most was his series on Genesis.
Yeah. Now it is in we ourselves that there is to be found the Edenic layer, or that of paradise and the fall, of which an account is found in the book of Genesis of Moses. Do you doubt the essential truth of this account? Descend into the depths of your own soul and descend as far as the roots, as the roots to the sources of feeling, will, and intelligence, and you will know. You will know, i.e., you will have certainty that the biblical narrative is true in the most profound and authentic sense of the word, in the sense that you must deny yourself, deny the witness of the inner structure of your own soul in order to be able to doubt the intrinsic truth of Moses's account. The descent into the depths of your own soul in meditating upon the account of paradise in Genesis will render you incapable of doubt. Such is the nature of the certainty that one can have here. But of course, it is not a matter of certainty with regard to the garden, its trees, the serpent, the apple, or other forbidden fruit, but rather with regard to the vital psychic and spiritual realities that these images or symbols reveal. It is not the symbolic language of the account which gives certainty of its truth, but rather what it expresses.
Right, and that's exactly how Jordan presented it. He didn't ask anyone to buy into that. He didn't ask anybody to believe in the, quote unquote, literal truth of the physical garden, the serpent, the apple. Like, that's not what his focus was on, which is why it hit people. Yeah, because he broke through that layer of like, oh, we don't even have to pay attention to this because it has this stuff, which I still think are important to have deeply symbolic meaning. But yeah.
Well, it's not that we don't have to pay attention to it. It's that we don't have to choose between the two, I think.
Correct.
Right? Because I actually believe that the journey toward some kind of faith, which is what happened to many people in the movement, was a journey toward the other part of the story, right? And so, yeah.
Well, and it's because of awakening that consciousness of like, basically you're awakening to people that like, oh, I was in Eden.
Well, they know it as a truth, right? That's why
I have fallen from the garden.
Yeah, like many people have said, I knew this, right? That's a response that Jordan Peterson got from a lot of people was, but they said, I know this, but you articulated it for me, right? So there is a deep sense of knowing in people, but it needs to be, it's sacred magic, Nate.
Right.
It has to be articulated.
Well, the very next thing he says is it expresses, talking about the Eden story, it expresses in symbolic language the first layer.
Yeah.
First, in the sense of the roots of all that is human and human nature, of human psychic life, or its beginning. Now, knowledge of the beginning, initium in Latin, is the essence of initiation. So
Which is why
Essentially, Jordan was unintentionally perhaps initiating people, which was causing them to begin to seek something.
Yeah, what
Because he wasn't giving them, he didn't have anything to, he was giving them the secret of initiation without having anything to actually initiate them into.
Well, who better than a psychologist?
Right.
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 And the thing is, like, he goes on, I don't know where it is, but he says that you don't initiate yourself, you become initiated, right? So, and the thing with Jordan Peterson during that whole biblical lecture series was he was becoming initiated too, because he said often that he was thinking while he was talking, right?
Which means, since for Tomberg, the only true source of initiation is the master, who is Christ, Kyrios, our Lord. That means that there was an encounter with Christ. And I know that's going to be really hard for certain, like, creedal, propositionally oriented types of Christians to accept, but that's actually what went on.
Of course.
Because Christ participates in our humanity.
Well, I mean, if you have a panentheistic conception of God in the world, then we are always, and all of us are always, encountering Christ.
And Antichrist.
Yeah.
Which we'll get to.
Yeah.
Later.
Yeah, well, there is no Antichrist without Christ. Christ brings the Antichrist.
Well, and not according to Tomberg, but let's get there. Like, Tomberg actually, what he says about the Antichrist would definitely challenge that. He's what Tomberg suggests is actually that Christ opens up a new way, a different way, as the true Son of Man, who is the Son of God, as opposed to the Antichrist, which, well, do we want to skip to that part? Do we want to handle that next, since we're talking about it? We could talk about that.
Is that way skipping? Is that all that part about the
It's hold on a second. I think that we're skipping that. Do we want to go there, or do we want to talk about the fall first?
I wanted to talk about the vertical consciousness, because the way that I've thought about the fall was that it was, and it's interesting because it is a literal fall when they see their nakedness, right? Like, they go from this posture to this, right? You have to look down to see your nakedness.
Right.
And so you don't just fall into some kind of psychological state, or but you literally, everything about you falls down. Like, your head comes down. You don't have that vertical consciousness anymore. And he talks about that here.
Yeah, page
132.
132, yeah. Do you want to start from, like, where he lays out the threefold part of the temptation, or do you want to start with the part where he talks about vertical consciousness, which is a little bit further down?
I'll just start with I'll just read this part. The temptation in paradise is threefold, just as was the temptation of Jesus Christ in the wilderness. The following are the essential elements of the triple temptation in paradise, as it is described in the account of the fall in the book of Genesis. She listened to the voice of the serpent. She saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, Genesis 3:6. She took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her husband, and he ate, Genesis 3:6. The voice of the serpent is that of the living being, animal, whose intelligence is most advanced, the most artful, amongst all living beings, animals, whose consciousness is turned towards the horizontal, animals of the fields. Now the intelligence of Adam and Eve was, before the fall, vertical. Their eyes had not yet been opened, and they were both naked and were not ashamed, Genesis 2:25, i.e. they were conscious of everything vertically, from above to below, or in other words, in God, through God, and for God. They were not conscious of naked things, i.e. things separated from God, which is duality, right? Like, Yeah, the formula expressing their perception, their vision of things was that which is above is that which is below, and that which is below is that which is above. Tabula Smaragdina 2. Thus, although they were both naked, they were not ashamed, because they saw divine ideality expressing itself through phenomenal reality. It was vertical consciousness, simultaneous knowledge of the ideal and the real, whose principles are found formulated in the Emerald Table. The formula of horizontal consciousness of the serpent, Nahash, would be that of realism, pure and simple. That which is in me is as that which is outside of me, and that which is outside of me is as that which is in me. This is horizontal consciousness, simultaneous knowledge of the subjective and the objective, which sees things not in God, but separated from him, or naked within itself, through itself and for itself. And as the self here replaces God, horizontal consciousness being that of the opposition of subject and object. The serpent says that on the day when Adam and Eve, eat fruit from the tree, which is in the middle of the garden, their eyes will open and they will be as gods, i.e. the self will replace the function previously filled by God, and that they will know good and evil. If before they saw things in divine light, they will see them now in their own light, i.e. the function of illumination will belong to them just as it once belonged to God. The source of the light will be transferred from God to man. This was the temptation that Eve heard in listening to the voice of the serpent. Its essence is the principle of power, which is autonomy of the light of consciousness. And Eve listened to the voice of the serpent. This voice was as audible to her as the other voice bearing from above the single commandment, you may eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For on the day that you eat of it, you shall die. Genesis 2:16-17. She therefore heard two voices, two inspirations arising from contrary sources. Here is the origin and principle of doubt. Doubt is twofold inspiration. Faith is a single inspiration. Certainty is vanquished doubt. Certainty is vanquished doubt. It is faith regained. Should I stop there?
I have a whole bunch more highlighted, but
We
I
can keep
think
going.
that no, we should stop, because that last thing is worth reflecting on, I think,
Yeah,
where he says certainty is vanquished out and it is faith regained, but it's also, he's talking about um doubt being the result of listening to two voices, right?
right. I mean,
Rather than to um rather than to the single voice of the divine.
right. He also says that doubt, further down, he goes on to explain that doubt pushes you into this, how does he put it? I think he calls it groping, a groping towards
Yeah, a
something,
groping trial. Yes, a groping trial. Yeah.
which he also, like he says here, the spiritual world does not in any way suffer experimenters. One seeks, one asks, one knocks at its door, but one does not open it by force. One waits for it to be opened. And so he says something about this groping trial as being
Right. So that means that lets you know that he's not talking about the certainty of fact, right? That's not,
no,
which would apply to realism, which would apply to the horizontal consciousness, which would apply
no.
to
It's a gnosis.
the
It's a,
prince of this world, right? It's a certainty that's reached by focusing on listening to the singular voice, by being focused on the vertical instead of the
yeah,
horizontal,
yeah,
essentially.
yeah,
And that's only accomplished through spiritual practice. That's how you that's how you get that kind of certainty.
yeah,
Um, spiritual practices can lead you into the experience of the presence of God. And when you have the experience of being in the presence of God through those spiritual practices, there is no doubt. But because we're human beings, there's always the potential to fall back into that, which is why we have to be diligent in our spiritual practices.
Right.
Which is, and the very next thing he talks about is obedience, right? Obedience, the principle of obedience is devotion without reserve to the sole voice from above. Now, the very fact that Eve listened to another voice than that from above, that she compared the two voices, i.e. considered them as if they belonged to the same plane, and therefore she doubted, this very fact was an act of spiritual disobedience, and it was the root cause and beginning of the fall.
This reminds me of Maximus the Confessor's idea of, now I'm going to forget the word, the two wills.
Oh,
what's
the gnomic and the natural.
The gnomic and the natural will.
Right, right. So the gnomic will is horizontal.
Yeah, and it chooses.
And it chooses.
Deliberates.
Yeah, right, and it's associated with, all the other things he's talked about, with like these sort of reduced understandings, like it's associated with that kind of like narrowed version of love that that Freud reduces sexual desire. It's associated with will to power.
Well, it's a fall into the duality too, right? When you start to choose between some things, and the singular, the natural will is, so Maximus would say that Christ didn't have a gnomic will. He had a natural will, which was always aligned to God.
Correct.
Right?
Yes. And it's interesting, like he says, Tomberg later on in this chapter, he says something very simple, but I think it's very profound. And what he says is that the root cause of all of this is seeing the other as less real than ourselves.
Yeah,
seeing the other as a shadow.
Yeah, which made me want to quote George MacDonald all over the place, but I thought I'll spare everyone.
No, what's the MacDonald quote that you wanted to share?
Oh, I didn't even look for one. I thought, they're so tired of my George MacDonald quotes.
No, we all love George.
The shadow is
Saint George MacDonald. I agree with David Bentley Hart on that one.
But I just wanted, in light of what you just said, is seeing everything as real, because I was getting my hackles up in the first part of it when he was talking about, where did he say that now? Oh, when he's talking about things that were less living, right? We are surrounded by innumerable living and conscious beings, visible and invisible, but rather than knowing that they really exist and that they are as much alive as we ourselves, it nevertheless appears to us that they have a less real existence and that they are less living than we ourselves. And I've always hated that way of looking at the world, because I'm an animal lover, but I don't see, and I'm not the kind of animal lover who I see them as living. And so I wasn't sure where he was going to go with this, and I was like getting ready to fight with him.
Oh no, because
then he said
earlier he talks about how that love, that radiating love, it like that begins from the principle of the Adam Eve. Yeah. He says that involves like the love for the entire creation.
Right. So then further down, he says, now to feel something as real in the measure of its full reality is to love. I love that. To feel something as real in the measure of its full reality is to love.
Which means that which means you can't be looking at things as subject and object.
No, you can't.
Because something that is looked at as an object, you are automatically putting it at a lesser state than you.
It's not as real. Yeah.
So, right, exactly. So in order to avoid that, you have to be looking at things as subject and subject.
Right. It is love which awakens us to the reality of ourselves, to the reality of others, to the reality of the world, and to the reality of God. So ourselves, others, the world, and God are all equally real, right? Insofar as we love ourselves, we feel real. And we do not love, or we do not love as much as ourselves, other beings who seem to us to be less real. So in order to love properly, you have to see everything as real. Everything is as real as you are. It doesn't make it the same, but it's as real. I don't know how else to express it.
No, that's right. No, that's, yeah.
Yeah.
So let's see here. This is an interesting. He actually talks about this um using a light metaphor. This is actually, I think, related to what you're just talking about. Um, just as the light of the sun renders us seeing with regard to things of the physical world, so does the light of the spiritual sun, grace, render us
Yeah.
seeing with regard to what is brought about from the spiritual world. Light is necessary in order to be able to see there as well as here. Similarly, air is necessary in order to breathe and to live. Is not the air which surrounds us a perfect analogy for the gratia gratis data, for the gratuitously bestowed grace? Because to live in the spirit, vivifying spirit is necessary, which is the air of spiritual respiration.
Yeah.
And then let's see. I think let's talk, since we talked about it, let's get to what he says about Antichrist, because it is interesting. Let's see. I think actually I might want to start here just slightly before he actually he says, since the new alliance is the fulfillment of the old, the work of redemption began with the redemption of the three primordial temptations. He's talking here about the temptation in the garden. But this time it was the Son of
What
Man.
picture?
This is page 137 at the very bottom.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Got it.
This time it was the Son of Man who was tempted, and the temptation took place not in the Garden of Eden, but rather in a terrestrial wilderness. And this time it was not the serpent, the most artful amongst animals of the fields, who tempted him, but the prince of this world, i.e., the new man, the Superman, or the other Son of Man, who, if incarnated, would be the realization of the promise of freedom made by the serpent. Antichrist, the ideal of biological and historical evolution without grace, is not an individuality or entity created by God, but rather the egregore or phantom generated through the biological and historical evolution opened up by the serpent, who is the author and master of the biological and historical evolution that science studies and teaches. The Antichrist is the ultimate product of this evolution without grace and is not an entity created by God. The divine act of creation being always, without exception, an act of grace. He is therefore an egregore, an artificial being who owes his existence to the collective generation from below. Let us ponder that, therefore, the notion of egregore with a view toward understanding better what the Antichrist is. This important and enigmatic figure of esotericism and Christian Hermeticism, but at the same time is the source of the temptation in the wilderness. And then he gives a couple of quotes, which he actually ends up like disagreeing with in part. But he goes on to say, there are no superhumans. There are superhuman spiritual entities which are not artificially engendered, which manifest themselves and reveal themselves. So, so he will be talking about, for example, angels there. The confusion between that which descends from above and that which is engendered from below is moreover very widespread amongst materialistic scientists, as also amongst occultists. Thus, many biologists consider the unity of consciousness or the human soul as the phenomenon or some product of millions of points of consciousness belonging to the cells of the organism's nervous systems. For them, the soul is only an egregore engendered collectively by millions of individual cells. But it is not so. The egregore of the cells certainly exists. This is the phantom of an electromagnetic nature which resists decomposition after death for some time and which can manifest in haunted houses, etc. But this phantom has nothing to do with either the soul itself or with the subtle bodies, etheric or life body, and the astral or soul body, with which the soul is clothed in addition to the physical body. Now, to say that the mystical church or the body of Christ, for example, is an egregore is to advance the thesis that it is a phantom engendered by millions of believers, just as the phantoms of the dead are engendered by millions of cells. The confusion of the soul and the phantom is a sufficiently serious error. No less serious is the case of the confusion of revelations and inventions of spiritual beings who reveal themselves from above and egregores engendered artificially from below. because egregores, as powerful as they may be, have only an ephemeral existence whose duration depends entirely on galvanizing nourishment on the part of their creators. However, it is the souls and spirits from above, forming, inspiring, and directing communities of human beings who nourish and vivify human souls. For example, archangels, who are the spirits of nations, principalities, archai, or time spirits, the spiritual entity with which Tibetan Buddhism, not to mention Christ, whose flesh and blood each day vivifies and unites the church, Christ's mystical body. Egregores are therefore nourished by men, whilst the latter are nourished by souls and spirits from above. Nevertheless, although God, Christ, the Holy Virgin, and the spiritual hierarchies, the saints, the church, or the mystical body of Christ are real entities, there still exists a phantom or egregore of the church, which is its double, just as every man, every nation, every religion, etc., have their doubles. And I think the double demand there, that I wonder, especially given what he said to Jung, I wonder if that could be tied to the Jungian shadow.
Well, I wouldn't tie it to the Jungian shadow, but I would tie it to George MacDonald's shadow.
Right.
Which are two different things.
Just occurred to me as I was reading it that
I have shadow written all over here. Like
right.
It's shadow, shadow, shadow.
Right.
I read something in my conversation with Jason and Luke that I think is really, really pertinent here.
Okay.
If you're interested, it's
let's hear it.
A bit of a read. Okay. I got it from a paper. I don't know who the author is now. I didn't write his name down, but it was about the shadow in Phantastes. One of the things that I noticed about the shadow in Phantastes is that the shadow is, when I thought about the shadow, because I was thinking about the Jungian shadow, and then I thought, okay, what is the shadow for George? And I thought, a shadow is cast when it hits a material object, the sun, right? And the sun is revelation. So it hits the material object, and the material object casts a shadow. And I thought, oh, okay, so a shadow is materialism. It's what happens when revelation is blocked by materialism. Okay, I think that, and that was
I think that's really good. That's really good. I think that's right.
So then oh, sorry.
No, that's really good. I was going to actually add on to what you were saying to reinforce your point, but I kind of lost what I was going to say. But that's excellent, because I think that's precisely right.
Yeah, and so oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, which is why he's describing the Antichrist as an egregore, by the way, because which is why, like, I mean, evil has no positive. It's not a thing. Has no positive being. It's not a thing created by God, right? So that makes sense, given what especially given what he's about to say, even further about the Antichrist and about evolution.
Well, he actually talks about materialism in that part that you just read. But anyway, let me just read this. MacDonald's romantic roots lead him to focus more on moon symbolism. Burma gives symbolic precedence to the sun, the similitude of Christ. While Burma was likely an influence, MacDonald must have encountered other alchemical texts as well. In light of its connection to the black sun, the shadow can be identified with what is known to alchemists as the Negredo. So I think that's why I think that these two things.
I think that's why you're seeing the alignment here, because like
it's
alchemical study is part of the body of knowledge that Tomberg is drawing on too.
Exactly, right. So the Negredo is the black color representing death, which a substance takes on during the transmutation of base matter into the philosopher's stone. In the alchemical tradition, the philosopher's stone can be seen as a substance that transcends the material elements and thereby has the power to manipulate them, or as a human being that has completed a process of spiritual regeneration and has become unified in spirit with the divine, as in the Gnostic and Hermetic traditions. This process goes through many different stages that vary according to the alchemist or alchemical tradition in question, but a process consisting of at least the three main stages of putrefaction, coagulation, and sublimation is usually followed. The nigredo is part of the process of putrefaction or dissolution. This dissolution is nothing but a killing of the moist with the dry. In fact, a putrefaction and consequently turns the matter black, quoted from Trismosin. The moist in this context can be the spirit in a substance or in humans. The dry can be seen as elemental matter. So, and just a side note, this is the Ahrimanic and the Luciferic, in my opinion. It's the sea in the dry land, okay? The moist and the dry.
Well, yeah, right. So that's interesting.
So the dry can be seen as elemental matter separated from spirit. The nigredo then is the result of the separation of spirit from matter. So the nigredo is this putrefaction process. Okay.
I think a good way of thinking about. Oh, sorry, I didn't know. I thought you were done. Go ahead, please.
No, it's a little bit lengthy, but I'm just kind of making I'm trying to tie it back into what we're talking about. In MacDonald's symbolic conception, a human under the spell of the nigredo is a disenchanted human, a material human, reminiscent of the scientific naturalism that reigned in Victorian Britain at the time of the writing of Phantastes in 1858. Indeed, we soon see that the shadow has transformed Anodos into a rational materialist from the enchanted young man able to see the spirit in things when he first entered fairyland, symbolized by his ability to see fairies enchanting the flowers. The, quote, most dreadful, unquote, part of this development is that soon he begins to welcome the shadow's disenchanting presence. In a land like this is a quote, with so many illusions everywhere, I need his aid. Oh, sorry, I just lost it. Where did this go? Okay, here. In a land like this, with so many illusions everywhere, I need his aid to disenchant the things around me. He does away with all appearances, Barfield, and shows me things in their true color and form. If I live in a waste instead of a paradise, I will live knowing where I live. Now that's when he's choosing the shadow, okay? Right. MacDonald uses the sun to symbolize this disenchanted way of knowing. Though the shadow is not dependent on Anodos's position in relation to a particular light source, it shows up blacker in the sunlight, while it is not visible by moonlight. In the full light of day, Anodos experiences fairyland as the mechanistic workaday world of industrial Britain. Enchantment or awareness of the spiritual essential in nature is much more difficult. In other forms of light not connected to the shadow, such as dawn, twilight, and sunlight filtered through the trees, fairyland is revealed as it is beneath the moon. A panentheist world in which both external and internal meanings are seen in the symbolic repository of nature. Moonlight is a symbol of knowledge, reflected between the self and nature through imagination, a guiding light beneath which the enchanted nature of matter is more visible. Moonlight is thus directly connected with a fairy or dream, or as a way of knowing. Night is the fairy's day and the moon their sun, unquote. This symbolic structure matches with the role played by the sun and the moon in medieval alchemy. In alchemical texts, the sun is often related to fire and sulfur, while the moon is connected to water and mercury. Mercury, seen as a literal metal, but even more importantly as a primal element representative of water and earth, is the principle of fusibility, while sulfur, seen as representative of air and fire, is the principle of combustibility. Mercury gives permanence to metals, while sulfur corrupts them. The sun of Phantastes is symbolically applied to Anodos in order to begin the alchemical process through a combustible process of putrefaction, a function of sulfur, while both water and the moon elevate him through coagulation, a function of mercury. And then right at the end, he says, It is important for humans to view phenomena as living symbols so that they will be aware of their essential unity with nature and thus begin to glimpse the face of God. The materialist path is therefore the path away from unity. And for MacDonald, quote, oneness with God is the sole truth of humanity. Life parted from its causative life would be no life. It would be at best but a barrack of corruption, an outpost of annihilation. MacDonald has often been accused of being vague, but he is very clear on this point. A disenchanted state, such as that symbolized by Anotis's shadow, is death. So in light of all that, I know that was a lot.
No, that was good though. I actually wanted to make a really quick comment about when you brought up how you saw this playing into the Luciferic and the Ahrimanic. I think that's right. And I think what you have is the Luciferic is associated with that false promise of illumination, right? The promise of the serpent should be like God's. That moves the source of illumination to the human self. And then the Ahrimanic is what actually we're fed to.
Yeah, it delivers
if
up.
we actually follow that.
Yeah, yeah.
It delivers up that pursuing that Luciferic false illumination leads us into directly to the Ahrimanic.
What's interesting though is that there is a telos in the whole thing, I think. So you have this process of putrefaction, right? Or dissolution or deconstruction, you know, and it's followed by coagulation and then a sublimation, like a higher state of being, which is the U-shaped journey, which is birth, death, and resurrection.
Well, we have to move we have to move beyond the horizontal plane in order to be able to begin to live as we are called to live, as we ought to live again.
Right.
There's no, as long as you remain solely on the horizontal plane, we're remaining in the Ahrimanic, which let's come back to this. This is really good because I think this sets some more background for what he's about to say here.
Yeah, I think so too.
Regarding the Antichrist, this is the phantom of the whole of mankind.
Right, and if you take that word phantom to be shadow, because that's I think what it means.
Exactly, it is the shadow of all of us, of mankind collectively. That's right. Yeah. The being engendered through the whole historical evolution of humanity. He is the Superman who haunts the consciousness of all those who seek to elevate themselves through their own effort without grace. He appeared to Friedrich Nietzsche and showed him in an instant all the kingdoms of this world, which have existed, exist, and will exist in the circle of eternal return. He invited him to cast himself down into the domain which is beyond good and evil, and to embrace and announce the gospel of evolution, the gospel of the will to power. And this alone transforms stone into bread, and organic matter into animal, and animal into man, and man into Superman, who is beyond good and evil and who obeys his own will. Yeah. He appeared to Karl Marx, who showed him in an instant all the kingdoms of the world, where all the slaves of the past are transformed into sovereign masters who are no longer obey either God, having dethroned him, or nature, having subjugated her, and who eat their bread, which they owe solely to their own knowledge and effort in transforming stone into bread. And the phantom of humanity has appeared to many others. He appeared also to the Son of Man in the desert. This was the meeting of the divine law made flesh and the law of the serpent, biological and historical evolution made soul. Divine law is grace. It is the activity descending from the Holy Trinity, which was revealed 40 days before the temptation in the wilderness, which the baptism of Jesus in the Jordan was accomplished by John the Baptist. The law of the serpent is the action of the will moving gropingly forward, snaking through epochs and layers of biological evolution, passing from form to form. It is the triad of the will to power, the groping trial, and the transformation of that which is gross into that which is subtle. Vertical Trinitarian grace and the triadic spirit of horizontal evolution met, therefore, in the consciousness of the Son of Man in the consciousness of the Son of Man, 40 days after the baptism in the Jordan. And then the three temptations of the Son of Man took place. And just as the baptism in the Jordan is the prototype of the holy sacrament of baptism, so is the meeting of grace received at the baptism in the Jordan with the quintessence of the evolutionary impulse since the fall, the prototype of the holy sacrament of confirmation. For it is then that grace from above is firmly established against the law from below. It is then that that evolution gives way to grace. And then I want to go into this because the way he's talking about evolution probably seems strange. So this is where he clarifies what he's saying here. The law of evolution, the law of the serpent comprises the struggle for existence, and as bread for food is the principal factor in the struggle for existence. The fact of the entry of grace into human history since Jesus Christ signifies at the same time the possibility of gradually abolishing the struggle for existence. It is therefore the vow of poverty which will abolish it. The devil then took him to the holy city and set him on the pinnacle of the temple and said to him, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will give you his angels charge of you, and on their hands they will bear you, lest you strike your foot against a stone. Jesus said to him, again it is written, you shall not tempt the Lord your God. Matthew 4, verses 5 through 7. This is the groping trial to which natural evolution owes much, which speaks this time. It is the method of so-called natural evolution which has replaced, since the fall, the world created by God, i.e. paradise. Because evolution proceeds gropingly from form to form, trying and rejecting, then trying anew. The world of evolution from protozoa to vertebrates, and from vertebrates to mammals, and then to apes, and then to Pithecanthropus is neither the accomplishment of an absolute wisdom nor absolute goodness. It is rather the work of a really vast intelligence and a very resolute will, pursuing a definite aim determined by the method of trial and error. One could say that it is a matter more of a great scientific intellect and the will of an experimenter, which is revealed in natural evolution, the existence of which one can no longer deny, rather than the divine wisdom and goodness. The tableau of evolution that the natural sciences, above all biology, have at last obtained as a result of prodigious work reveals to us without any doubt the work of a very subtle but imperfect intellect and a very determined but imperfect will. It is therefore the serpent, the most artful animal of the fields, that the world of biological evolution reveals to us, and not God. It is the serpent who is the prince of this world and who is the author and director of the purely biological evolution flowing from the fall. Read The Phenomenon of Man by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, which gives the best summary and interpretation that I know of natural evolution. Study this book and you could not arrive at any other conclusion than that the world of evolution is the work of the serpent of paradise, and that it is only since the prophetic religions, of which there were many, and Christianity, that the good news, euangelion, of another way, that this evolution of that of the evolution of the serpent exists. So he says that quite unambiguously that he accepts that evolution is real, but he considers it the work of the prince of this world.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that? Not something you encounter every day.
I agree with him. That's kind of how I've always felt about it, that it's a perversion of the real. And it is a, like this idea of the groping trial, it's the snake crawling on its belly, right? To me, from a poetic standpoint, because this incomplete creature slithers toward perfection and then deceives what is already
Right.
perfect, right? And then that is what the, you know, the story says, is that, you know, that the serpent will now have to crawl on
And
the
and the Antichrist is an egregore that is created by the creation that is following that path.
well, yeah, I mean,
Which
it's a shadow of what
right. And that McDonald piece that you shared, that piece on McDonald that you shared, actually shows exactly this.
Yes. Yeah.
Because it's showing you that the world you see, if your eyes are merely on the horizontal, relying on the illumination that you gain as a result of the fall, then you're convincing yourself that you're seeing the world as it really is. You're right, and that you're accepting hard truths, but actually you're actually not seeing reality at all.
Yeah. And I mean, that quote from whoever this is, Trismosin, it's nothing but a killing of the moist with the dry, right? You suck the moisture out of something with the dry. And
right.
and so it's a
And moisture is, moisture is like kind of necessary for things to be alive.
Well, yeah, and it's the moist is the spirit or substance in a substance or in humans, and the dry is elemental matter. So it's sucking the spirit out of the human being.
Right. And that's what the objective world is.
And that's why it reminds me of the Ahrimanic. And you know, there's a paragraph just at the top on 141.
Okay.
Where I think this is a good, just he doesn't call it the Ahrimanic, interestingly enough, because he would have known the term, but
yeah.
Hunger of the spirit, the soul, and the body is the experience of emptiness or poverty. Which is exactly what happens when the moist gets sucked out by the dry, right? It is therefore the vow of poverty which is put to the test when the tempter came and said to him, if you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread. Command these stones to become loaves of bread. This is the very essence of the aspiration of humanity in the scientific epoch, namely to victory over poverty. This is what mankind does.
Right.
Synthetic resins, synthetic rubber, synthetic fiber, synthetic vitamins, synthetic proteins, and eventually synthetic bread. When? Soon, perhaps. Who knows?
Well, we're there, right? I mean, you wrote this in 65. We are in the era of synthetic bread, and not only synthetic bread, but of synthetic meat.
Right. Command these stones,
synthetic, you name it.
Further down, command these stones to become bread. This is the formula of evolution in the sense of transformism, belonging to the mentality of some academics who teach that the plant kingdom, i.e. bread, is only a transformation of the mineral kingdom, i.e. stones, and that consequently organic matter, bread, is only the result of the physical and chemical regrouping of little molecules into giant molecules, macromolecules, in the process of polymerization. Polymerization is therefore considered today by a number of scientists as the possible, even probable equivalent of the operation proposed by the tempter in the wilderness, namely the transformation of stone into bread.
Right.
And
as opposed to the alternative, which is the reception of the gift of the bread from heaven.
Right. And so to me, that is like technocracy. It's the Ahrimanic, right? It's transhumanism. It's all of that, and it's that groping trial, right, of evolution.
Now think about all of what we just talked about, and what Tom Berger said about the Antichrist in this chapter, and Luke's thing where when he talks about transhumanism and the pursuit of artificial intelligence. He'll say that they're trying to build a body for Antichrist.
Yeah.
And that's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's precisely what the endeavor is.
Yeah. And the reason that there's only Christ and Antichrist is because there's you and then there's your shadow.
Right.
Right.
So yes, right. Shadow. So Christ and Antichrist represent two potentialities.
Right. Because he does
that we can gravitate toward.
Right. And he talks about them making the church, where is that now? here he says, but just as he who sees in Russia, for example, only the bear, in France only the cock, and in Germany only the wolf, is being unfair toward the country of the heart, capital H,
Right.
the country of intelligence, capital I, and the country of initiative, capital I. So is one being unjust towards the Catholic Church when one sees, instead of the mystical body of Christ, only its historical phantom, the fox. So there's, for each one of these, for everything, there's a shadow.
Right. That's right. There's like all he says the church has an egregore.
Right.
But that
which is cast by which is revelation hindered by materialism. If you think about my example of the sun shining on the tree, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And this is why I don't like politics. I think it should become really, really clear now.
Yeah.
The reason I don't like politics is because politics is entirely about the governance of the horizontal plane.
But don't you think, though, and this is a question, that whatever, that this principle of something being real and something having its shadow, that there is a higher politics, that there is a shadow politics, but then there is a higher politics,
There's another that's just why Michael Martin yesterday, his newest podcast, for his new podcast that he launched, was on the idea of the alternative polis.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's what I think the church is supposed to show, the possibility of the vertical polis. This is why so, for example, Pajot will make a big deal out of the fact that the New Jerusalem is a city. But where does the city come from? It descends from heaven.
Yeah.
It comes from above. So that means it's not the same kind of city as what you find on the horizontal plane.
Yeah.
It's a different kind of city.
Yeah.
So that matters. That matters.
Yeah. 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 It's also a city. I'm trying to remember the description of it. It's been a long while since I read it, but it's also a city of illumination, right? Like,
well, it's also the city that has the measure of an angel and the measure of a man, right? So
yeah,
so it's not the city, it's the city. So the Antichrist is trying to essentially, the city is trying to, I think the egregore of the Antichrist is moving us to build hell. I don't believe that hell, if it exists, is our creation.
Well, I think we're already there. Like, this is like the very last statement here that I read. MacDonald has often been accused of being vague, but he's very clear on this point. A disenchanted state is death, right? And that is symbolized by, notice, this shadow. And that is what the Antichrist is. It's death, right? It's a disenchanted state. It's like the quote from Fantastes, where he says, in a land like this, with so many illusions everywhere, I need his aid, the shadow's aid.
Right. This is why the martyrs saw their death as coming into life.
Right. To disenchant the things around me. The shadow, he does away with all appearances and shows me things in their true color and form. And if I live in a waste instead of a paradise, I will live knowing where I live. That's hell.
Right. And that kind of echo in that right there, that echoes kind of like Milton's Satan too, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That sentiment.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't, I mean, even if I'm in hell, at least I have it on, I'm having an existence on my terms.
Right.
I'm seeing reality as, on my terms.
And so there's an interesting thing in here about the sun, because what the sun does is it's explicit, right? When the sun shines on something, you see the whole thing, all the contours, all the colors. When the moon shines on it, it's veiled. And it's under the moon that the fairies live, right? So there's this idea of the feminine, right, in the moon, and the masculine in the sun. And I was just going to make a point now, I forgot it. Dang it. Because there's something in here that he says, about the day and the night. Do you remember where that is? I underlined it. Let's see if I can find it.
I remember a bunch of day and night stuff in the chapter on the Pope. I don't remember that here,
He
but let
just
me
said
do
it.
a
He
little
said he just has a
quick
little.
search.
Oh, here he talks about grace as the spiritual son.
Yeah, I read that.
Let me see.
Let's see.
I know I underlined it. Oh, here. Christian esotericism unites these two methods of initiation. The master has two groups of disciples, disciples of the day and disciples of the night. The first being disciples of the way of ecstasy, and the latter those of the way of ecstasy, which is implicitness, explicitness, right? The sun, the moon. He has also a third group of disciples of day and night, i.e., who possess the keys to both doors at once, to the door of ecstasy and that of ecstasy. Thus, the Apostle John, author of the Gospel of the Word made flesh, was at the same time he who listened to the heart of the man, had the twofold experience, macro. Oh, weird. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. We had a little bit of a technical difficulty there for a moment. You might want to repeat the last thing that you said.
Well, then, he gets, I just read about John, the disciple, had the twofold experience, macrocosmic and microcosmic.
Right.
The cosmic word and the sacred heart, which is, he talked about that in the paragraph before, but that's
which is why he's able to write Revelation.
Yeah, which is the day and the night to him, the macrocosm and the microcosm, right?
Right. Well, and then we should talk a little bit. He talks about instancy and ecstasy there, and that is something he does talk about in the chapter. Very simply, we'll start with ecstasy because I think more people understand that. Ecstasy is the mode of ascent, of spiritual ascent. It's moving toward the macrocosmic, for one is able to hear the music of the spheres, which he also refers to as Pythagorean initiation, but he says it's also certainly.
He says that's ecstasy.
No, ecstasy is the macrocosmic, the music of the spheres movement. Ecstasy is the interior movement.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's the interior versus exterior, and you actually both are valid paths, right? Both are valid paths.
Yeah.
Both will ultimately lead you to the discovery of the beginning. So I just wanted to clarify the meaning there.
Right,
so ecstasy is the interior, the interior meditation, and the ecstasy is the exterior contemplation or ascent.
Yeah. Like he says, ecstasy is the disciples of the day, and ecstasy is the disciples of the night. Ecstasy to the heights beyond oneself, and ecstasy into the depths within oneself.
Right, exactly. So the day-night matching is perfect there.
Right, which is interesting in light of that alchemical comparison of the putrefaction process, right, where the sun exposes and the moon reveals. It's just interesting.
Right. No. Yeah. Well, because that moon revealing has to do with that idea of the hidden interior depths, right?
Yeah.
I noted in your conversation with Jason and Luke, not Thompson but Johnson. He said Jason said something very interesting about how it wouldn't be that unusual if you were writing a piece of fiction and you went into a cave and you saw the moon.
Yeah.
But that would somehow make sense.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing that we're talking about here.
Interior. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interiority.
Right. The light within. The true light within, and not the false illumination offered by the serpent.
Yeah.
So let's see here. Did you want to go over that? He actually spends a lot of time. Did you want to go over that part a little bit in a little bit more detail about the
microcosm and the macrocosm?
microcosm and the macrocosm, instancy and ecstasy, that part? Or
I mean, we could read, where is it here? You know, like he makes a statement about John being the disciple of the day and night, right? But
correct.
he has both those experiences. And then he says, it is thanks to this twofold experience that the gospel which he wrote is at one and the same time so cosmic and so humanly intimate,
Right.
of such heights and depths simultaneously. There, the macrocosmic solar sphere and the microcosmic solar sphere are united, which explains the singular magic of this gospel. For the reality of paradise is the unity of the macrocosmic solar sphere and the microcosmic solar layer. The sphere of the cosmic heart and the solar foundation of the human heart. Christian initiation is the conscious experience of the heart of the world and the solar nature of man. God-man is the initiator and there is no other. I think that kind of speaks for itself.
Right.
Yeah.
There's one more thing I wanted to mention here about the whole, in light of what he's talking about, the egregore thing here, because he talks about it a little bit in terms of like some of the Old Testament gods that the Israelites were resisting.
Mhm.
Let's see. For this reason, the prophets of Israel stigmatized the spiritual fornication of the people of the Old Alliance each time. Of the Old Alliance here, he means the alliance with the serpent, essentially, right? The horizontal
Yeah.
plane, the horizontal worldview. Each time that they let themselves be seduced by the cults of the strange gods, Bel, Moloch, and Astarte. These gods were only egregores, creatures of the collective human imagination and will, whilst the Holy One of Israel was the revealed God. Unimaginable though he was, having no other relationship with the human will than that of law imposed upon it. This is why the strange gods had a singular attraction for the Israelites, being the gods of this world, and not the transcendent God of revelation, obedience to which was the return to live in a spiritual monastery in relation to this world and its gods. They were always being tempted to throw themselves from the height and isolation of the pinnacle of the temple above into the layers of collective instinct below, and to test whether there would be angels who would bear you up lest you strike your foot against a stone, i.e., to try to find in the near and dense layers of the forces of natural evolution directing and protecting forces with less effort than in the height and rare air surrounding the pinnacle of the revealed God's temple. The principle of spiritual fornication is therefore the preference of the subconscious to the conscious and superconscious, of instinct to the law, and of the world of the serpent to the world of the word. So that kind of I wanted to add that because it links it to it kind of shows you how this is playing out throughout the biblical story.
Yeah, because we always have the mob. That's why.
We always have the what?
We always have the mob.
The mob, right? Right. Yeah, I'm glad I'm glad you said that because I've been thinking about I've been thinking about Gerard a lot lately because I've been reading a lot of traditionalist writers, and I think that what traditionalist writers like can lose sight of is that there's a dark side to tradition because these
Well, that's the shadow of, right, that there's always a dark side, right? That, like, this is the thing. This is the tyranny of the majority. whereas democracy is the rule of the majority, right? Where it's supposed to be fair and equitable, but it can devolve into this tyranny of the majority, right? Especially if you have an egregore, because the egregore is then going to dictate whatever.
Well, I'm less concerned about like the Enlightenment democratic stuff now, which I think most people in this corner of the internet have pretty clear vision of why that's a problem. I'm actually talking now about some of the more conservative impulses that start to just like associate Christianity only with conservatism and only with tradition.
Mhm.
And I should be clear about how I'm using the word tradition here. I'm using tradition as in terms of the traditionalism of the traditionalist school, right?
So you could
That
say
sees,
big T and little t. Which one are you talking about? The big T or the little t?
I'm talking about, well, I don't know which one would you capitalize. It's usually, I mean, I've both can be capitalized depending on the context. But what I'm trying to say here is that this happens mostly in politics, right? Where like, yes, modernity is a rejection of the traditional world, right?
Mhm.
And postmodernity is essentially growing. It's a reaction to impatience with modernity not getting rid of tradition fast enough. And its failings, but both essentially want to destroy tradition. But there's a reason why modernity happened in the first place. And the reason why modernity happened in the first place is that there actually is a dark side to tradition. And that is what I this is
Well, I don't know. I mean, Barfield would argue that modernity happened because of disenchantment, right? Because of the shadow, because of materialism, because of the Enlightenment.
right. It's not okay.
Maybe we're on the wrong track.
No, I thought I don't.
I'm on that.
I think I'm not communicating what I'm trying to say very well here.
Okay.
So my specific concern here is that tradition, if it's not read within it, tradition, if it is not read through the light of the logos, right? If it is not read through Christ, it has a neo-pagan dark side. This is because Nietzsche was not in favor of modernity. Nietzsche was in favor of tradition, right? Essentially, he wanted to resurrect the Greek pagan world. This is why he hated Christianity so much. So I can see there are certain tendencies within right-wing traditional circles to want to make moves using tradition as a defense that are actually pagan. There's a neo-paganism that's under the surface there, and I think it's true that this is true of left-wing. There's left-wing neo-pagan too, but they're different. They're different neo-pagan elements, kind of inspired by different neo-pagan spiritual principles, right? So, but I I think this tends to get ignored, and we just act as if tradition is a good thing in and of itself without specifically the revelation of Christ. It can only be good in the way that Christ transforms our understanding of that.
Yeah, I don't know. Tradition is, I don't know what you mean by that, actually.
I'm talking about the kinds of things that Alexander Dugin is talking about quite specifically. Because he's operating out of the traditionalist school. But
Mhm.
and and quite specifically, he actually tries to put the Dionysian logos on equal footing with Christ, essentially.
Yeah, I don't
Because
know.
he talks about three different forms of logos. And that's very concerning to me, because like that's a very, like, I think he likes Nietzsche, and he likes Nietzsche too much, and he doesn't see why Nietzsche is inspired by Antichrist. So that's why that's my specific concern.
Mhm.
Because um our as Christians, we should be focused on Christ first and foremost, because tradition begins tradition begins anew with Christ. And although, like, Tomberg talks about like the radiating effects of the incarnation, right? So that the
Yeah.
light of Christ actually can begin to permeate other traditions. But that's happening because of Christ. Like, that happens, like, so the fact that you were able to look at other traditions and see this unity, Christ is the source of that unity.
Right.
Like, specifically, like, that's where it comes from. It's what Tomberg refers to as the radiating effects of the incarnation.
Right.
Like, without Christ coming into the world, without the incarnation, that's not what you would see.
That
And
was that was from last week's chapter, right?
yes, that was
Or the
from
week
that was from that
before.
chapter. And
Yeah.
I've been reading Upton, and I've been reading Rene Guénon and a bunch of traditionalist sources lately, and I just wanted to mention that, because I do think that, like, there's a we still need to be more Christ centered. We still need to be centered on Christ, I think. Even though, I mean, I consider myself like a Christian traditionalist of sorts, but I think that traditionalism gets some things wrong. And one of the reasons it gets things wrong is because it doesn't look at it doesn't pay attention enough to Christianity.
I don't even like, honestly, like, this kind of all goes over my head because I don't know what traditionalism is. I don't
Gotcha.
know what it contains. I have no clue. Like,
It's
um,
traditionalism is essentially, well, it's related. So Tomberg is Christian Hermeticism is actually kind of similar, right? Because there's so what Tomberg's presenting is similar. This is why I'm thinking about this.
yeah.
I'm seeing a difference between Tomberg's Christian Hermeticism and the traditionalist school. And that is, Tomberg is more clearly, although he'll make these comparisons with other faiths and show these where these things link up, he's very much focused on the fact that this only works because of the incarnation. So
Well,
traditionalism,
I think what he does, I mean, I'm gonna try to translate this into my own language so I can see if I'm understanding it properly. What Tomberg does is he catches up the multiplicity in the unity. That's why he talks about the color back here. Where's that little quote? Adam, Eve, love includes the whole range of undifferentiated colors, whilst Freud's libido is only a single color, isolated and separated from the whole. And this separation from the whole, and the whole is the principle of chastity, is exactly the inverse of chastity. It is the very principle of unchastity. So
right?
as soon as you
Yeah,
start to categorize things, so this is why I have difficulty with isms, because when we talk about an ism, we've categorized, like we've taken it out of the unity, right? Where it belongs, like it exists. That's why Freud could see sexuality. That's why Marx could see economical problems. That's why Adler saw the will to power, okay? Because they're there, but you can't take them out.
right. It's
You
only a
extract
part.
them out.
It's only a part.
You can't,
Right. It's only
yeah,
a
you
part.
can't extract them out. So you're not going to solve any problems, in my opinion, by tackling one of those things. It's only going to lead to unchastity, right? Because it always has to be caught up within the unity of the whole. And he says here, for unchastity, let me see here. Yeah, I don't have, I no, then he goes into, yeah. I mean, and I mean, well, we're back to love, right? To be, this is to love, and to be alone is to love one's self. And that's why this is what he says here. It is not good that Adam be alone, means to say, it is not good that man loves nobody but himself. This is why YHVH Elohim said, I will make him a helper, right? This is the origin of love, and it is common both to love which unites man and woman and to love of one's neighbor. In the beginning, there was only one love, and its source was one, since its principle was one. And then he goes down and says, it is a cascading current which tends to fill and inundate all. That is God being all in all. That is panentheism. That is perennialism for me. Okay.
Right.
So, and for me, faith is knowing that, right? That I walk knowing that God is all in all, that he is everywhere present, filling all things, and that everything in the world, like he says here, to feel something as real in the measure of its full reality is to love. It is love which awakens us to the reality of ourselves, others, the world, and God. Insofar as we love ourselves, we feel real. So in order, and then right below that, he says, now two quite different methods exist which can free us from illusion. Me living, you shadow. And we have a choice. The one is to extinguish love of oneself and to become a shadow amongst shadows, right? And then he goes into this description of, I think, Hinduism. But this is why I talk about loving properly, because when we love properly, we operate in faith. We know that everything is real, that God is all in all, that he is everywhere present, filling all things. And we can't extract out of the unity. We can't try to make something responsible for this cascading domino effect of, tragedy in the world or whatever, right? It's always everything. It's always everything all at once, and there's, according to him, there is a shadow side to everything, including the church, right?
Right.
If you let the revelation of God be hindered by the materialism of the world, if you fall into duality, which is that horizontal plane, right, which is that lack of the vertical in your life, then you are living in hell. That's what you're already there, right?
Right.
And the dry is sucking the moist out of you. And it's this process of putrefaction, but it leads into coagulation and sublimation, right? So for me personally, that is what the U-shaped journey is for. We're not perfect. We'll always fall into duality. We'll always be tempted to turn stones into bread, right? And we'll do it for good reasons. But then we will putrefy. And through the putrefaction process, we will coagulate and be raised to a higher plane.
Right, but what I'm talking about is a particular, there's a tendency for, so traditionalism is simply the belief that there are multiple valid paths to understanding the transcendent deity, right? So, and they all have essentially that they all have a common root, and in some ways, like Christian Hermeticism is also about understanding that common root too, but it's doing it like in a way that's still Christ-centered, and understanding that it's actually only the incarnation that even makes that possible to begin with.
Right. But that's just
so here's the thing.
Knowledge.
There's a political tendency in traditionalist circles to move toward this reactionary kind of right-wing politics that I think is overly concerned with the horizontal.
Well, then it'll putrefy.
Right. But I wanted to mention it because I see people who I think are good people, who are getting caught up in this, you know? And it's like a lot of them are people who like very much are able to see what's happening on the other side of the political spectrum on the left, and how that's leading people to fall apart, but they aren't seeing in the danger in what they're embracing themselves. That's really it. And I've expressed this before. It's like, it's this entire idea that, you know, if we just had a Christian monarch, everything's fixed. No, sorry. That doesn't fix anything.
Yeah, well, the problem is that you want to fix something. Like, that's not the, this is not,
Thank you
this
for
is not the
saying,
goal.
thank you for saying that, Shari. Right. It's like, there's a great part in the book where Tomberg says that like good doesn't win by resisting evil, it wins by existing in the world.
Well, Tomberg said at the very beginning of this book that the Hermeticist, no one can compete with the Hermeticist because the Hermeticist doesn't compete.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so and
Right.
and this is what Christ is. He doesn't compete. That's why he doesn't defend himself. That's why he remains silent before Pilate, right? And so this is the let it be mode of being, right? Which it sounds really, oh, how nice, how virginal, you know, but just try doing it when things are going sideways. Then
Right.
the impulse to fix is so strong, right? And it's precisely then where Tomberg would say we need to remain chaste.
Right. Well,
Chaste.
you know, another way of thinking about this, if you remember back when we were reading Harding, like when Harding in the hierarchy of heaven and earth, he always talks about how like things can only be governed from one level up on the hierarchy.
Right.
Right. Well, politics by its nature it's horizontal. It's on the same plane. Like,
But it can be vertical though. Like I'm not saying human politics, but to me, politics is the social cohesion that we have to deal with. Like,
right. And that's what the church is. That to me, that's what the church exists for. The church is here to show the way of Christ.
Right. So
which is another way.
How do we this is for me, how do we love properly? Right. That's politics.
Right.
That's what it is. That's what it means to me.
Yeah.
That's what it means to me.
Right. But here's the thing though, like, especially given, like, go back to chapter 4 and the discussion of the emperor and the difference between power and authority, and about how authority, if you have to use compulsion, you don't have authority. Like, so how do you express that love of neighbor? Like, there are people who legitimately think that you can express that politically. I don't think you can. I think it's impossible, because politically you're automatically claiming power, not authority, but power over your neighbor. So how is that a legitimate means of expressing that? This is a serious question. Like,
Yeah,
I'm open to changing my mind on this. And I'm always, like, right now I'm sitting where I am, I'm still in Christian anarchist, but I'm always engaging with the best thinkers that like have this other vision of like a more positive kind of, you know, of Christianity being capable of a more positive kind of political action. It's appealing to me, to be honest with you. It would be easier for me to believe that than to believe what I believe.
Well, I'm very pessimistic when it comes to the horizontal plane. I don't think people will ever figure out how to get along with each other properly, or how to govern one another properly, or how to make, you know, things equitable, how to spread prosperity, how to do all. I don't think that they're too,
not at scale anyway, not at scale.
They're too full of their own shadow.
Right.
And even in small groups, it starts to get really
And
big.
and political entities tend to always they're like I mean, to me, it's like politics is the politics. It comes down to this. Politics is the science of power. I mean, that's what it is.
Well, this is, I mean, even in a family, how many times do you hear children say that's not fair? Or even a wife to a husband or a husband to a wife, that's not fair. I deserve as much, if not more.
Right.
So where is the loving properly, the laying down of one's life for another, right? And that is the only thing that works politically, is if everyone is willing to sacrifice their own wants and needs, right? That's why he talks about chastity and obedience and what was the other one?
It's poverty, chastity, obedience, and poverty.
Yeah, because that is literally how you need to live.
Right.
You need to live.
And the only institution that is capable of teaching people to live that way is the church.
Right.
There's not another institution.
This is why I actually really appreciate Jordan Peterson's insistence on the individual, because the way that he insists on the individual is for the betterment of the collective, right? That you clean your room, that you choose to do the things that are good for you, but for your family, for your community, right? So you work on that life of poverty and chastity and obedience, right? For the betterment of the whole. That is catching up things into the unity, right? That's catching up the multiplicity of the one or the many into the one. But I mean, you can, you as an individual, it's not individuality in that I go and do whatever I want. He's reiterated that 1,000 times. And I think that is the only way to make the world a better place. And that is literally the body of Christ. That's what that is. That is when the body can become a body and not an egregore.
Peterson, the way he talks about the individual to me is a mixed bag. Sometimes the way he talks about it, I can see.
When he talks about it from
when he talks about it in that more personalist way that you just described, it's good. But then he'll say things about like the idea that he'll say things that like the idea of the sovereignty of the individual is the best idea that was ever invented, that kind of thing.
Well, I think he actually means sacredness in that sense. I think
I don't think he means sovereignty. Sovereignty is a bad way of conceiving of it.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you don't want.
Because
that's a power idea.
I think what he does there is he translates sovereignty, sacredness into sovereignty because of law. Like he talks about how the law makes the individual sovereign in that they are innocent until proven guilty.
Although there is a connection, maybe there is a connection between sovereignty and sacredness, though.
There is. It's agency.
Because and also because it's wholeness too, right? Between sovereignty and wholeness.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm a little bit too quick to critique.
Maybe you're reactive to the buzzword.
If it's okay, if you actually have a nuanced understanding of sovereignty, that connects it to what we mean when we say that God is sovereign.
Yeah.
Right. And it's divorced from the will. And you actually have a notion of sovereignty that's divorced from the will to power and the idolatry of power, then I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But most people, when they talk about the sovereignty of an individual, they are not. They're not divorced from the will to power, and they are not divorced from the idolatry of power. They very much mean it in that way. Like in the simple, like, you can't tell me what to do kind of way. Yeah. Yeah. Which, even though I'm a Christian anarchist, I think that's a shitty attitude.
Well, there's I'm trying to remember where we read that, if it was in the last chapter of this book about individual and freedom.
Oh, yeah. I think that, well, the big thing was about freedom was in there was a lot about freedom in chapter 4 on the emperor. Maybe actually. Because he talks about how freedom and essentially Tom Berg in that chapter talks a lot about how freedom and love is how the how the vertical hierarchy is ordered by the divine.
Yeah. Freedom is the spiritual existence of beings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. That was one of my favorite bits of the book so far.
But it's not an individual freedom, according to him.
Right. It's
somewhere, I don't remember where I read it, but something about the individual and the freedom.
Well, it's not a gnomic freedom that he's talking about. It's literally an existential freedom. Like for Tomberg there, he's saying that
well, it reminds me of the freedom.
your existence is freedom.
It reminds me of the freedom that
Because
Frankl taught.
you may not have existed.
Yeah.
It reminds you of the freedom that who talks about?
Viktor Frankl.
Oh, Frankl, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That freedom is a word that like we use with multiple, it has a lot of different valences and they get confused when we talk about it.
Well,
And
you always kind of end up, when you talk about social cohesion, you always end up, when you talk about freedom, with the problem of where do my rights begin and my responsibilities end, or
right.
vice versa, right? Where do my responsibilities begin and my rights end?
Right.
And I've always been of the opinion as a Christian that I don't have any rights. I actually don't. That Jesus demonstrated that I have to love my enemies while they hammer nails into my
Right.
hands. Okay.
Yeah.
And based on that, I don't have any rights. For me to claim rights, the only right I have is to ask my creator why this is happening to me. That's a right.
That's so right. I kind of cringed. This was not my priest, but we had like we had a very nice woman in our congregation, and I don't think ill of her or anything like that. She was just expressing something that is basically just like an unthinking motto amongst Americans. When she was talking about, she was the priest invited her to talk about tithing, and she was talking. She one of the things that she said was that property is a God-given right. I'm like, no, it's not. No, really, it's not. That's a
the thing.
that's a bunch of liberal modern nonsense.
Yeah, and the problem with thinking that you have rights is that where do you dial back your rights when you need to think of the rights of others, right?
And if that were the case, then Jesus would have said, if someone asked for your coat, tell them you have a right to property and to buzz off.
There are a couple of there's a story of a saint, Dionysus, I think. Dave told me what his name was. And his brother was murdered, and he went into the barn of his home where he lived, and the murderer of his brother was hiding in there. And he knew who the murderer was. Everyone knew who the murderer was. That's why he was hiding. The murderer didn't know that Dionysus was the brother of the man he murdered. And Dionysus fed him, and actually people came looking for him, and he lied to them and sent them in another direction. And then he urged the man to repentance and sent him on his way. And tradition says that he came back and became a monk later, right, at that same place.
Right.
And I remember reading that story and thinking, oh my God, like that is so irresponsible.
And
why would he do that?
Right. This is right. This is precisely why, to me, that right there, that is so not pragmatic, no. Right? It makes absolutely no sense in accordance with any of the logic of this world.
Yeah.
Like, this is why there's no possibility of a Christian politics, because a Christian politics, it's either going to be politics or it's going to be Christian. You can't be both political and Christian at the same time, because politics is dictated by those very pragmatic concerns that Christianity like challenges you to not take into consideration.
Yeah, on the other hand, though, I recently watched a mini documentary on an anarchist community in Denmark. Is Denmark? Copenhagen, in the middle of Copenhagen. And it's been there's, I think, 50, 60 years or something. It started in the 60s.
Mm. Not a Christian anarchist community, but just like a secular
It's
anarchist
called Christiania.
Christiania. Okay. Oh, I've heard of it. I know what you're talking about. It's with a K, right? Yeah.
No, it's with a C.
Oh, is it? Okay. I thought.
Yeah, yeah. And they call themselves anarchists, and they did have to make some rules for specifically geared towards hard drugs.
Right.
So they allow marijuana and alcohol, but they don't allow any hard drugs, heroin and stuff, because their streets were littered with drug addicts, and homeless people and stuff. Yeah, it's a tightrope.
See, I'm not that kind of anarchist though, because I'm not against rules and I'm not against authority. I'm only against power.
Yeah.
And you can. So, but authority requires love.
Yeah,
You
but that's ambivalent or
can't exercise
ambiguous.
authority without love.
Ambiguous. That's ambiguous, though, I think. I mean, I would argue with you here, but
Right. It just can't happen at scale. It can't happen at scale. Like I can do it.
it can barely happen in a family.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. It's hard enough to do it consistently as a father. It's hard enough to do it consistently with my children. The expectation that it can be done at scale is just.
I mean, to me, the family is the ultimate testing ground for your Christianity. It is the ultimate place where you learn to love one another, right? And your enemies, because sometimes people in your family can truly be your enemy, and we often say, oh, well, I didn't get to choose my family. In other words, I wish they weren't part of my life, right? I don't even want to know them.
They're not as real as me.
They're not as real as me. Exactly. And so that, that's the place where I've always said, if I can't stick it out in my family, I mean, I had a friend one time, he left his wife and kids and for another. And I said to him, he had good reasons because he came out, right? And as gay. And so, for some reason that gave him some kind of special privilege to commit adultery and abandon his wife and children, right? And I said to him, I don't care what your reason was. How can you actually love another after that? How can you properly love another after that, right? This is why God hates divorce, I think. Not because it's wrong, but because you have now failed to the biggest test, right? In a sense, and I'm not condemning anyone who's been divorced. I'm not saying they've done a terrible thing, but I think God hates divorce in the sense that it breaks his heart, okay? Because it is marriage, just as monasticism, okay? Both the same thing, is the hardest thing to do. And it's because it requires you to die. That's what it does.
Right. Well, I'm gonna say a couple of things, one of which might not be too popular, but so first of all, like if there would be no divorce if you were actually seeing the other as real as you are.
Right.
That's observation one.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
divorce is inherently sinful, and I am also not trying to make anybody feel guilty or judged. I'm also a divorced person, and I'll leave it at that. And because it doesn't happen if both parties are viewing the other as real. as they are,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
This is also by that right there, that is such a profound thing that Tomberg says, because that is the explanation of literally every sin. Like, why are people like argumentative and try to make you agree with them? Because they don't think you're as real as they are.
Right.
That's what they're
Yeah.
saying to you when they do that.
Right. And reality is dictated by the hierarchy of
Which is why real dialogue can be so transformative, because it doesn't have that spirit. It's like, we might have different ideas, but in a dialogue, it's like, I'm not trying to force you. I'm seeing you as real as I am.
right.
And also there's a possibility that I might learn something for you because we're both real. That's in a dialogue happens when both parties are seeing the other party as real.
Well, that's like the Rilke quote that I read earlier. And perhaps the sexes are more akin than we suppose, and the great renewal of the world will perhaps consist in this, that man and maiden, freed from all false feelings and perversions, will seek each other not as opposites, but as brother and sister, as neighbors,
Right.
and will unite as human beings to bear in common, simply, seriously, and patiently, the heavy sex that has been laid upon them.
Right.
And then there's another beautiful MacDonald quote. For when is the child the ideal child in our eyes and to our hearts? Is it not when with gentle hand he takes his father by the beard and turns that father's face up to his brothers and sisters to kiss? When even the lovely selfishness of love seeking has vanished and the heart is absorbed in loving. That's when you see people as real as you are. That you no longer selfishly desire all the affection for yourself, but that you turn your father's beard, right? Turn to kiss your brothers and sisters because you want to be engulfed in it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm gonna say, like, I also, you can see a little bit like you can see the root of like a lot of sexual sin in what he talks about in this chapter, where when he contrasts like the kind of libidinal love that Freud focuses on as being just like this one, not that it's not real, but it's just this one part. It's red in the spectrum of white light,
Right.
whereas that real love, the Adam Eve love, the paradisal love,
It's the deception
is the fullness.
right. Like to me, it's the deception that if you pull the one thing out and fix it, everything else will fall into place. But that's not how it works.
Right, and
This
is what happened with the man that you told the story about, right? That's exactly what he did. It's just like, oh, this is what's real, is this red light, and he forgot the fullness.
Yes. Yes.
And now here's the thing, like, I hope for that man that he finds in a future relationship, even if it's with I still think that there's a possibility, even in a same-sex relationship, regardless of what you think about whether that is, let's set for aside a moment the question of whether you think that's sinful or not as a Christian. And I would think Tomberg's light analogy gives you a reason to think that it is. There is a disorderedness to it, right? But we're all sinners.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that there is not a legitimate possibility in that relationship for there to come something greater out of that. Like where you actually can begin to see the other as fully real and experience that fullness of love.
Yeah.
That's because God is gracious, so that potential is still there.
Yes.
Now, and I'll just leave the question open as to whether the continued carnal nature of that relationship would undermine that or not. I'll just leave that an open question that I don't want to dive into, because it's, there's a lot of, it's as human, there's a lot of feelings there.
These are matters of the heart.
All these people are still loved by God regardless.
Yeah, of course.
So
yeah.
So I'm saying that even a relationship that a very conservative Christian might view as like disordered actually does have the possibility of being something that can spark this full experience of
Well, when I
of
spoke to my
love.
friend, I didn't actually talk about the disorderedness. I have this gets to what Tomberg's talking about as seeing everything as real. I understood that his experience was real, but it didn't matter,
Right.
because of his commitments to God and the vow that he made to God, right? And the responsibility that he had to his children. Okay, so
it's not, yeah, it may be real, but it's only like this tiny sliver, right? It's only just like, yeah, I mean,
he could
yes,
have
your desire for this may be real, but it's not the only thing that matters.
It could have been for any reason that he left them behind, is what I'm saying. It didn't have to be for that reason. Any reason that included leaving behind his wife and children unattended and uncared for and unfathered and unhusbanded, okay, was not a good reason. Like, he could have gone on a bucket trip list, right? He could have committed suicide. He could have, I don't know, joined the army and become a mercenary and went to Iraq or something. I don't know. He could have done any one of those things, and they were all the same to me. Okay. They were literally all the same.
They're all the same.
They were all real. They were all real. They would have been all real reasons to go. But my point to him was, how do you love properly after having done that?
Right.
That's the problem. Now you've set yourself in a place on a road, right? Where that lack of responsibility, I don't know how else to say it, has left you a hole.
Yeah. But I think God is gracious enough that even in that case, that there is a possibility. I don't know what happened with this person down the road, but certainly.
Yeah, for sure.
So.
For sure.
Well, Shari, this was a great conversation. We're like 30 minutes past our.
Wow.
And my wife was just calling me, so I know it's like it's my mom's birthday today, and I probably need to like actually do some stuff to get ready for that.
Nice.
I've got some barbecue that's hot holding right now that I need to go check on too. So
okay.
All right, Shari, thanks for the conversation. I'll get this posted. I might get it posted a little bit later than normal because I do have that birthday party. But
okay, sounds good. Have a good
bye for now. Hopefully we'll have our friends next time.
Yeah, it would be nice.
Although it was great talking to you. I mean,
yeah, same here. I always enjoy it.
Okay, bye.